Last Train to Nowhere. Episode 6. Jason stood frozen on the platform, his eyes locked on the faceless figures creeping toward them through the fog. Every second felt heavier, the weight of his past pressing harder on his chest. The train doors stood open, but it no longer seemed like a sanctuary. His heart pounded in his ears, drowning out everything except his own thoughts. Did he deserve to leave? The figures edged closer, their eerie, featureless faces turning toward him as if they knew exactly what he was thinking. The others stood nearby, Evelyn clutching her locket, her eyes distant, lost in the past. Grace trembled beside him, her hands wrapped tightly around herself, as if holding her body together was the only thing stopping her from collapsing. "They're getting closer," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible over the suffocating silence of the platform. She looked to Jason, eyes wide with fear, pleading for him to make a decision. But Jason couldn't move. The faceless figures seemed to grow larger with each passing second, their presence overwhelming. Evelyn took a shaky step backward, her gaze flicking between the train and the fog. "Mark," she whispered, clutching the locket tighter, her knuckles turning white. Jason knew what she was thinking. She couldn't leave him behind, not when he still felt so close. "We don't have time," Liam urged, his voice harsh, cutting through the tension. "We need to get on the train, now." But Jason hesitated. What if leaving wasn't the answer? What if the train was just another trap, like the town itself? The faceless figures edged closer, their blank stares unwavering. He could feel them pulling at him, waiting for him to fail, to become one of them. His breath came in shallow gasps. It was now or never. Inside the train, Mia felt like the walls were closing in around her. The air was thick, oppressive, and every breath she took felt like a struggle. She glanced around the narrow corridor, her eyes flicking to the passengers slumped in their seats. Their faces were blurred, unrecognizable, and her stomach twisted with unease. What had this train done to them? Liam paced near the window, his hands shaking slightly as he glanced outside. "They need to get on," he muttered. "Why aren't they moving? Why aren't they getting on?" "They're scared," Mia said quietly, her gaze fixed on the faceless passengers. She knew why the others hadn't boarded yet. The train wasn't what it seemed. It felt wrong, like it was pulling them in, stripping them of who they were. The blurred faces of the other passengers sent a chill down her spine. Some of them were barely recognizable as human anymore. "Something's not right," Mia said, her voice trembling. "Look at them." She gestured to the passengers, her hand shaking. "What's happening to them?" Liam frowned, stepping closer to one of the passengers. The man's face was blank, smooth, like someone had erased all the features that made him unique. His body was still, motionless, like a doll abandoned in an empty room. "They're changing," Liam whispered, his voice barely audible. "Why?" Mia shook her head, fear gripping her chest. "I think the train, it's not a way out, it's something else. It's taking them." The train rumbled softly beneath their feet, a reminder that time was running out. They had boarded too quickly, too desperate for an escape to question the cost. And now the others stood on the edge of that same choice. Jason stared at the train, his mind racing. The faceless figures were closing in, their movements slow but deliberate, like they had all the time in the world to take him. He could feel the weight of his past pressing down harder than ever. The robbery, the shot, the blood on his hands. It was all he could think about. His guilt had been his shadow, following him everywhere, and now it had caught up to him. Grace touched his arm, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Jason, please, we have to do something." Jason swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know if I can. What if I don't deserve to leave? What if I'm just running again?" Grace's eyes widened, her face pale. "What are you talking about?" "I hurt people, Grace," Jason whispered, his voice cracking. "Back before all this, I was part of something terrible and people got hurt because of me. I've been running from it ever since. Maybe this is where I belong. Maybe I'm supposed to stay here." Grace shook her head. "No, Jason, that's not true. You've changed. You've been trying to make things right." Jason looked away, his chest tightening. What if it's not enough? The faceless figures were almost upon them now, their presence suffocating. Jason took a deep breath, his hands shaking. He had to make a choice. He couldn't keep running forever. "I have to try," he muttered, stepping toward the train. But his feet felt heavy, like they were stuck in place. He hesitated at the edge of the platform, his heart pounding in his chest. Evelyn's hands trembled as she clutched the locket tighter, her mind swirling with memories of Mark. The faceless figures were closing in, but all she could think about was her son. The way she hadn't been there for him when he needed her most, the way she had failed to protect him. Her heart ached with the weight of her guilt, a burden she had carried for so long it had become a part of her. "I can't leave him," Evelyn whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't." Liam stepped forward, his face tight with frustration. "Evelyn, you have to let him go. You can't stay here forever." Evelyn shook her head, her grip on the locket tightening. "He's still here. I can feel him. If I leave, what if I'm abandoning him all over again?" "You're not abandoning him," Liam said, his voice softening. "You're holding on to something that's keeping you trapped. You know that staying won't bring him back." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. Deep down, she knew Liam was right. She had been holding on to her guilt for so long, letting it define her, letting it keep her tied to the past. But leaving, it felt like letting go of Mark, like closing the door on the only part of him she had left. "He's gone," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling, "and I have to accept that." Tears streamed down her face as she looked toward the train. She took a step forward, but the weight of her grief held her back. Could she really leave him behind? Could she forgive herself after all these years? The faceless figures were nearly upon them now, their presence oppressive, their silence deafening. Time was running out. The faceless figures moved closer, their featureless faces staring blankly at Jason, Evelyn, and Grace. The air around them felt heavy, suffocating, as if the fog itself were pressing down on their shoulders, weighing them down with their own guilt. The train doors stood open, the last chance for escape, but the figures seemed to block their way, their mere presence pulling the group back into the past. Grace's breathing quickened, her chest rising and falling in panicked gasps. She could feel the faceless figures getting closer, the air around her growing colder. I can't stay here," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her mind was racing, the memory of her friend's death replaying over and over, the car crash, the argument, the guilt. It was too much. It had been too much for so long. Jason watched as Grace backed away from the figures, her panic growing. He could feel it too, the way the town, the fog, the figures, all of it fed on their hesitation, their doubt, their guilt. The figures were waiting for them to give in, to stop fighting. "They're going to take us if we don't move," Liam urged, his voice sharp with fear. "We have to go now." But Jason's feet felt rooted to the platform. The faceless figures moved closer, their presence oppressive. He could almost feel their cold, empty stares crawling over his skin like they were already pulling him into their world. Evelyn stepped forward, her hand trembling as she reached for the train. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her mind raced with the finality of the decision she was about to make. The faceless figures were only a few steps away. The train's whistle pierced the air, sharp and urgent, as the faceless figures reached the edge of the platform. Jason, Evelyn, and Grace stood frozen, the weight of their decisions pressing down on them with crushing force. The train's doors remained open, a final invitation to escape, or perhaps another trap. Jason's heart raced as he stared at the faceless figures creeping ever closer, their blank stares locking onto him. Time was running out. Evelyn's hand hovered over the open train door, her fingers trembling. She could feel Mark's memory pulling at her, but Liam's words echoed in her mind. She wasn't abandoning her son. She was letting go of the guilt that had consumed her for so long. Could she make that leap? Could she forgive herself? Grace stood beside her, panic written across her face. The faceless figures loomed closer, and her breath came in ragged gasps. She had to move. She had to get on the train. But her legs wouldn't obey her. The memory of her friend's death clawed at her mind, threatening to pull her under. Jason took a deep breath, his feet heavy as lead. He took a step toward the train, but something held him back, the weight of his guilt, the fear that leaving would mean running away from his past once again. Could he leave without making peace with what he had done? The faceless figures inched closer, their presence suffocating. The train doors began to close. Jason, Evelyn, and Grace stood at the threshold, their fates hanging in the balance.
This is the end of the episode. Thank you for listening. If you like the story, please subscribe to our channel and check out our other stories. You can find the link to the next episode in the description below. What do you think about this episode? Let us know in the comment section below.